Hi and welcome to this DCP web tutorial. In today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a lower third YouTube subscriber animation using Adobe After Effects. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up the web browser quickly. We want to download one logo. So we're going to go to YouTube's Wikipedia page. I'll put a link to this page in the YouTube description. I'm going to click on the logo here so we can download this logo. So let's just drag and drop this logo into this folder here. So we've got a copy of YouTube's logo. Let's close the web browser. We need to do a little edit to this logo. You can use Photoshop, you can use GIMP software, you can pretty much use anything you want just to crop out this logo. We just basically want to keep the little play symbol but get rid of the text YouTube here. So we'll do that in GIMP. This is free software for you to use, so you can do this in GIMP. Let's drag and drop it in here. We'll go and click on the crop tool. We'll just draw around this sort of button shape here, hit the enter key, and it's cropped. Let's just go to file and we'll go to export as, and we'll just overwrite the original file. We don't need that, so let's just replace it. We'll keep all the default settings and click export. We can close down GIMP now. We don't need it, and now we've got the logo without any text written beside it. That's what we want. So let's go ahead and open up Adobe After Effects. Here's After Effects, and like usual we'll go to file, new, projects. We're going to create a new project. Let's click on the create composition here. So we're going to create a composition and we want it to be HDTV 1080p 29.97 seconds frames. So it'll be 1920 by 1080. We're going to use square pixels here and the frame rate will be 29.97. The resolution will be full. We can leave the start time code to all zeros, and the duration we want to put 0.8. We want it to be 8 seconds right here, 8 seconds, and the background we're just going to set it to black and click OK, and then click OK here. And we need to import some content, so let's just right click here, go to import and file, and we'll select that file from that folder. So we'll select the logo here. Let's just rename this to YouTube logo. It's nice and simple. It's called YouTube logo. Let's import it. So we've got the logo there. Here it is. Let's drag and drop that into the timeline. And now we can see the logo. We'll click on the handle. So we need the selection tool here. We'll press the letter V. We're going to click on this, and you see it's going to get squashed and all sorts. So let's hold down the we'll hold down the shift key, and we can resize it this way, holding down the shift key. We want it to be about this sort of size here. We're going to drag it to the bottom corner here, maybe a little bit smaller, right? So when you click to drag, hold down the shift key so that you can scale it on size, and we want it to be positioned around here. Okay, just like this. Then whenever you selecting content inside Adobe After Effects, you want to press F2 to make sure you deselect everything, right? So F2 is to deselect. Let's just go to Control. Let's press Control S to save our work. We'll go back to the desktop, go into this folder, and let's just call this YouTube subscribe -01. Let's just give it a good file name before we continue working. So we want to add a little sort of box area underneath, and then we're going to have some text that floats across it or does something. We'll think about this as we go along. So we're going to use the rectangle tool. If you long click on this, you'll get the options to select the other types of shapes here, but for now we're just going to use the rectangle tool here, the top one. So make sure that one's selected, and for the stroke we're going to leave it at 0 for the moment, right? The stroke we'll leave it at 0, and the fill option, when we click on fill here, we're going to click on the eyedropper tool and select the same red color, but we want to make it a bit darker, right? A darker shade. We want it to be exactly the same shade as the YouTube button. It's going to be a slightly darker shade. Now we can go ahead and draw a text box behind it. We want it to be quite large, something around this sort of size, something around this size. And we want to line this text box so it sits in the center point of this this button, but we want the button to be on top. So let's just minimize this layer here. We'll click here to minimize it, and we'll click on this shape layer 1, and we'll hit the enter key. That allows us to rename it, and let's call this text box background. Let's give it a sensible name so we know what it is when we're looking for it later. It's called text box background, and when you drag it one below the YouTube logo, now the logo sits on top. Let's click on the selection tool. Let's click on the logo first, and then hold down the shift key and click on the box. So they're both selected, but click the logo first, then the box. Then inside this alignment tool, so you've got an alignment tool here. In the drop down, make sure you've got selection, and then click center here, align vertically. and when you click that, it's going to line that box right into the middle of this YouTube logo button thing, right? Nice. Okay, we want to probably move this back slightly, so I'm going to use the arrow keys just to move it slightly off screen. You can see it's just slightly off screen, just a little bit. And we want to write some text in here. So this can be anything you want. It can be any message you want. It doesn't even have to be the YouTube logo. You can use this. You can use it for Facebook. You can create a similar thing for Facebook, for Twitter, for Instagram, for whatever you want. You can use this same workflow in many different projects. We're making one for YouTube today. And we want to add some text, right? So let's click on the text tool and let's click above the text box. And we're going to just type something in. So I'm going to type in something like subscribe to access 500, or let's do subscribe for free access to 500 plus video tutorials, right? Something like this. And then there's a couple of options to deselect the text tool. So we can press Control and then the Enter key. Control and Enter will deselect this text, but it will still keep you with the actual text tool itself. So to move away from the text tool, you need to press the letter V. V will take you back to the selection tool, right? So it's worth learning these shortcuts. They're going to help you speed up your workflow. So just want to center this. We've got the snapping enabled here, so it's going to snap to the center of this box, this text, and we just want to make that text box a little bit bigger. So let's click on it and let's just drag it by the handle just so it's a little bit bigger, and maybe we'll shift it to the right a little bit, something like this. So I think around here looks pretty good. The font I've selected is Arial Black, so it's Arial Black font. We can see in here all the different types of fonts, and I've selected Arial Black here. You've got all these different options of all these different fonts, so you need to go and find a font that you like, right? I'm using this font because it's quite bold and it stands out on this text here. I think it stands out pretty well. So now, you know, normally when I'm working in After Effects, the first thing I do is do my layout. I try and get the layout done first. That's point number one. Then point number two, you can work on the animation. And then point number three is all about sequencing. So if you follow that structure, normally you're going to come out with something pretty decent. So we do the layout first. This is a good example of layout. Then we do the animation. So we make our movements of how these objects are going to move, or fade in that and do all that good stuff. And then finally, we do our sequencing. What sequence do we want these animations to be in? So for now, I want to work with the logo. So I'm going to hide everything else apart from the logo. So let's hide these layers and we'll be left with the logo showing here, the YouTube logo. Let's click on the expand here. And when we click on the expand, we've got the transform tools. So these are all the elements that we can animate within After Effects for this particular object. It's a graphic object, right? So it has limited transform options, but there's enough in there for us to do what we need to do. And we need to decide how long before these animations sort of work. So normally in After Effects, I work on quite finite, small amounts of frames. So in Blender, we normally work on longer durations, but in After Effects, it's normally quite sharp, quick, fast, snappy work that we're doing. Nothing too long-winded, right? So we're going to move to frame 15. This is frame 15 here. This is 1 second. We're running at 29.9 frames, right? So 1 second is almost 30 frames, you could say. So to move to 15 frames, we can just click on the timeline here and type in 1.5, and that will move the playhead to 15 frames. And these little stopwatches here represent us adding keyframes. And we want to add a keyframe for the position, because we want to move the object. So we want to add one for the position, we want to add one for the scale, and we want to add one for the rotation, and also one for the opacity. So we're going to leave the anchor point where it is right now. The anchor point is really where the rotation happens. This is the center point, right? A bit like in Blender, you've got the origin point. In After Effects, you've got the anchor point, and I'll explain that in more detail in future tutorials. This is really a little beginner's tutorial, but it's still something quite nice to do. So we want to move back to the beginning because we've entered our keyframes. These are our ending keyframes. Normally, I put the keyframes at the end where I want the object to be at its final destination, right? Then we can go back to the beginning and we can manipulate it. So let's click on it first. Let's drag it to the left and hold down the shift key. And when we hold down the shift key, we'll move it without it sort of distorting or moving around all crazy. We just hold down the shift key and we can move it across here on a straight line. So we want to move it outside of the canvas. let's just press Control S to save. And what do we want to do? So now if we move the timeline, we can see it's going to move in. We want to do a bit more than that. So in the rotation, we've got rotation here. Here we can rotate on degrees. This one here allows us to rotate on degrees. So here you can pick specific degrees to rotate on, right? 45, 90 and so forth. But all I'm going to do is set that to value of 0. And the one on the left hand side, this is how many rotations you want. And we want one rotation, one single rotation. So now when we play it, let's see. So we've got one rotation here and here. So we need to set this one actually to a value of 0, I believe. And at the end here, it will be set to 1. So now let's just go to here. Let's set this one to 1 value, the end keyframe. So that should rotate. It's not rotating. Let's see why. Let's see. What am I doing wrong here? We've got a keyframe here. Let's just make sure we're adding it quickly. So this should be 1 rotation. Let's just see. Okay, now it's rotating. So let's just see what we're doing wrong. So I think here we need to set it to 0 value. And here we should really be setting it to 1. And that should rotate once. Now you can see it's rotating once. Okay. Not sure what I was doing wrong there. On this first keyframe here, I'm setting it to a 1. And then on the last keyframe, I'm setting it to a 0. So it will rotate at least once. Well, it will rotate once. If you want to rotate it less, then you have to do it by degrees here. So you can set that to 0 and set it to 90 and it will rotate less. But I think 1's going to be fine like this. And then we want to change its scale. So the original scale is set to here. You can see 43.2 here, 43.2, because this is not the original size of the image. When we dragged it in, we resized it, remember? So it's like almost 40% of its original size, but that's fine. We can move to the beginning. I think what I need to do is actually click on the keyframe. I think that's what I'm doing wrong. I'm not clicking on the keyframe, right? In fact, what we need to do here is set this value here. Let's not click on that keyframe. Let's set this value in here. It's actually joint together. It's got a constraint to it. So whatever you change this value will also change the other one. So let's set it to 0. And now it should rotate in and enlarge at the same time. And then on the opacity, we'll just set that to 50%. So it's going to fade in now slightly, right? And rotate in. So that's pretty much our logo done, or this YouTube logo animated. We're going to do a bit more work on it afterwards, but let's minimize it and let's open up the text box background, or let's enable it, right, so we can see it. Now I actually want to add a little border around here. The stroke here, I want to set it to, let's click on it, and I've set it to a slightly darker color, something a little bit darker than the box itself and the logo, right? There's almost like 3 shades of red here. We've got the bright logo, then we've got a darker background, and we're going to have a darker border around it. So we need to set the stroke to a value. I'm going to give it a value of 5, and then left click outside to see that. You can see this little stroke around the edge. Maybe we'll make it slightly bigger. Let's set it to around 10, so it might be a bit more visible. Now you can see it a bit more clearly. And we could maybe change that to maybe a slightly brighter shade. I think it's a bit too dark, but that's really hard to see. So let's see. Let's set it to maybe even a darker shade, something like this. So I think that would be good. Now you can see the difference between the stroke that goes around the edge and the text box that sits in the middle, or the background that sits here. So let's animate this background. What I want to do is expand it. So let's expand it here, and I want to expand the transform. And inside the transform, I want to change the scale here. So really I don't want anything to happen on this frame 15, so I'm going to move to frame 1 second, basically, 1 second here, and then I want to add a keyframe for the scale. But before I add the keyframe, I actually want to move the origin point. So I'm going to click on this tool here, or you can press the letter Y. When I click on that, that allows me to move this little dot in the middle, and that's called the origin point. So I'm going to click on it and drag it to the left, and I'm going to hold down the shift key, and I'm going to drag it right off the canvas around here somewhere, like around here. You can see that that's the origin point. So whatever I do now is going to animate from that particular point. If I were to rotate it, then this whole object will rotate around, but from this particular point, for example. And what we want to do is change the scale here. So let's add a keyframe. Here's a keyframe, and we want to we want to unlock the scale. So we want to manipulate the height and the width separately here. I want to go back to frame 15 and I'm going to change the scale here to a value of 0. So you can see it's animating from this point. So the logo will swoosh in and then this box will pop out like this, right? That's how it's going to animate for now. And also when it gets to the end here, I want to change the roundness of the edging of this box as well. So to do that, I need to go into the rectangle because I'm not manipulating the actual layer itself. Now I'm going to manipulate the actual object itself. So inside the object, inside rectangle here, we'll have roundness. And what I want to do is go to frame 115. So I'm going to go to 115 here and then set the roundness option here, turn it on, and I'm going to set it to a value of 25. So now you can see it's got a rounded edge. But I'm going to go back to timeline position 1 second, and I'm going to set the roundness to 0 here. So if we were to click outside to deselect, let's use that. Always go back to your selection tool, click outside or press F2, and now we can see the logo spin in, and then the text box will come in, and then it's going to get rounded off. Can you see it rounding off at the edge there? Just over here, it will start to round off like this. Okay. Now we just want to animate the text really, and I'm going to show you how to reverse this animation to fade it out. So we want the intro of this text and then we want it to reverse the animation on the way out as well. So let's click this up arrow or this expand arrow to minimize everything. Let's turn on our text and let's scrub through the timeline. And really a nice thing to do here actually is to press Control A. So when you're inside this section here, press Control A and then press the letter U. Letter U will bring up all of the keyframes, but only the keyframes that you're using, right? And sometimes I do that because when I expand this this text here, and if I go to its transform, I want to change its opacity, but then I can see the keyframes below to work out where my last keyframe was added. And it's actually added on frame 115. I already know that, right? So I'm going to go to keyframe 2 seconds here, right here, and on the opacity I'm going to put a keyframe here. And then I'm going to go back to 115 here. Let's see, 115. Make sure you're on 115. 115 frames. So 1 second, 15 frames. And set the opacity to 0. So now we should see the logo spin in, the text box come through. What do we do there? YouTube subscribe. Let's see, do we change the opacity? Okay. Alright, so I made a little bit of a mistake there. Because I selected all of the objects, it added keyframes for all of the opacities as well. Can you see? It's done one here, it's done one here, and here. So to fix that, really, all I need to do is just delete those. So really this keyframe here, let's just left click. This one here, I need to delete for the YouTube logo. I want to delete this one. So I'm going to select it with my mouse and just hit the delete key. And then I'm going to scroll down to here. I've got an opacity for the text box background, and that never did any fading. So I'm going to select both of these two and delete them. So that was my mistake. Let's just minimize these and let's stop making errors. Let's left click out to make sure none of the layers are selected. So now it should work correctly. Still something ain't quite right. So let's see. Text box background opacity is currently set to 0. So we want to set this to 100. The opacity. Let's check it now. Now it's working correctly. Okay. So sometimes we make mistakes, but it's sometimes we make a mistake, but the key is to know how to correct it. Let me explain why that mistake happened. When I clicked on here, I pressed Control A to select everything, and then I pressed U. And then when I set the opacity, because I've selected all of these layers, can you see they're all still selected? When I changed this opacity, it changed it for all of them. So the key is after you select everything and press U to expand, you need to left click out and then click on only the object that you want to work on. And it won't do that otherwise, right? So just be a bit careful. But if we make mistakes, we need to just know how to fix them. So let's see this now. And I'm quite happy with this, right? I would say there's a little bit of a delay here where there's nothing happening, where the text is well, there is something happening. The text box is rounding off, but it's just taking too long before this text shows. So I'm going to click on these two layers here and just drag them back to around here, so that we've got some sort of something going on consistently, right? So let's just hit the space bar and we can see that play out. I think that looks pretty cool. I quite like that. And now what we want to do is reverse this animation. So we want to leave it visible for a little while, and then we just want to reverse the logic. So the last thing to show is actually the text. So the text will be the first thing to disappear. So we're going to go to keyframe, or we're going to go to 3 seconds. So let's set the timeline on 3 seconds here, and we'll select these 2 frames. So we can middle left mouse click, use the box to highlight them. So just left mouse click, select over them, press Ctrl C to copy, and then Ctrl V to paste. We're going to paste them here. The keyframes are already highlighted, so we're just going to right click, go to keyframes here, and we'll select time reverse keyframes. So basically that will just switch around what these keyframes are doing. It's going to switch the information between them, so now the text will fade out. On these ones it fades in, and then we copy them, pasted them here, reverse the keyframes, and now they're going to fade out like this. This is good. And the next thing that happens is the text box comes in, right? So now we want to reverse the text box. That's all of these keyframes here. So we want that to really happen after the text is faded out. So let's select all of these keyframes here, these 4 down here, copy them and paste them. And we're going to right click on them, go to keyframe assist and time reverse again. So it's going to reverse them. We've got a bit of a problem. The text box is moving, or this background is moving, and then the roundness is happening afterwards. So we want to reverse that logic. We want it to go to square shape and then slide out. So all we need to do is just change the position. So let's select these top 2 ones and drag them here, and then select the bottom 2 and drag them over here like this. Now we'll see the text fade out. If we click outside, we'll be able to see this a bit clearer. But if you watch this edge around here, you'll see it start to square out, right? So now you can see it squaring out first, like here. That's a nice square shape here, and then it will fade out, right? Now we just got to do the logo part. So let's select all of the keyframes for the logo, press Ctrl C. Let's move to this position here on the last keyframe of that text box moving out, press Ctrl V. They're already selected, just right click on them, keyframe assist, reverse, and now it's going to roll outwards like this, and we're done. Right, nice. So it's on 5 seconds. So normally I leave a second here. Normally the second gap that I leave at the end is for if you want to do any sort of fading or transitions in your Adobe Premiere or your Magix Movie Edit Pro. We might test this in Magix, right? I made it a black background for a reason, because I want to chroma key it using the chroma key tool in Magix Movie Edit Pro, or you can do that in DaVinci Resolve or Adobe Premiere, any of those software. But what I'm going to do right now is move to exactly 6 seconds. So there's exactly 1 second left after the animation is completed, and I'm going to press the letter N. That moves the work area end to this position here, right? It'll always be like 1 keyframe after, I believe, something like this, but that's fine. I'm just going to right click at the top here and say trim comp, trim the composition to the work area. When I click that, now you can see it's got rid of all that extra stuff at the end, and our duration now should be 6 seconds, or maybe just 1 frame over 6 seconds. Let's press Ctrl S to save and drag the timeline back. And the last thing I want to do is press Ctrl A here to select everything, and we'll minimize everything. Let's minimize everything, and then what we'll do is click here to add what is this called again? This is called motion blur. So we're going to add motion blur to all of them. Let's left click outside, and to view the motion blur you need to make sure enable motion blur for all layers within the motion blur switch set. So you need to turn this on, and now if we click the spacebar to play, we'll have motion blur working, and that just makes the animation look that much better. And it's a bit hard to see it when it's playing, but if I were to click on the timeline and scrub across, you can see the blur effect at the end of the text, this text box, right? You can see the blur being applied here. It just makes things look, honestly, it just makes things look better. So you have to trust me on that one. So let's just play it and see it. So motion blur in, and motion blur will only work with objects that are moving, right? Something like this, and it's just going to make it look a lot better. Okay, let's go ahead and click on the timeline here. That brings it right to the beginning. Let's go to File, Save, and we want to export this. Let's go to Composition. Let's go to Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. Let's click on that. And this is, for me, the best way to export the video. You want to add it to the encoder queue. So here's the Adobe encoder here. And while it's prepping itself, we want to select here high quality 1080p HD here. That's what we want to select. And here you've got the bitrate. Everything is sorted out here. All we need to do is click here, and we need to choose where we're going to save the file. So let's just make sure desktop inside here, and we'll go inside this folder, and we'll click save here, and then we'll click the play button, and that's going to render it out. This should take no more than a few seconds, right? Let's just check it. There it goes. Job done. So let's close Adobe Media Encoder. Let's just go to File, Save. It's already saved. Let's just close down. In fact, before we close it, let's just check. So inside the folder, this is my desktop. We've got a folder here. Inside that folder, we've got the video content. So let's just set that, and let's just leave it to repeat and watch it a few times. Make sure it's good. So you can see this here. So whenever you're watching YouTube channels, you might see stuff like this. You might be wondering how people are doing it, how they're creating their own custom graphics. These little, we call these lower third titles, stuff like this, right? Or you can imagine news items might have stuff like this as well, where they want to put a message across. I like to do stuff like this to just tell people to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I might put this inside the content while it's still playing, you know, when I'm doing one of my tutorials. So let's actually test this thing. Rather than saying it's working, we want to actually test it. We can test it in a few different bits of software. I think today we'll use, we could use Adobe Premiere, I guess. I think today we'll use Magic Smooth Edit Pro. So I'm gonna open up Magic Smooth Edit Pro 2020. I've got the latest version here. Just video editing software, nothing too special, pretty standard stuff. And in here, I'm going to set it to NTSC 1080p 1290. 1920 by 1280, 29 frames a second, pretty much like our video clip. Click create, and then we'll go to the folder. I've got this test video clip in here. I'm going to drag and drop that onto the timeline, and I'm going to say don't adjust, and here you can see the video clip. So I made this in Blender. If you're interested in making this particular sort of intro, you can change it and put your own text and stuff like that. You can go and check my YouTube channel, and I showed people how to make this particular intro using Blender. But let's go back to the folder. Let's go into the folder here, and this is the video clip we just created. Let's drag and drop that onto the timeline. In this particular piece of software, this particular timeline is actually the bottom layer, and everything going below it is a new layer that sits on top. So you can see if I move across the timeline, I can see this, but then all of a sudden you'll see this YouTube thing, right? And then afterwards you'll see the magic, this cinematic thing at the end. So we want to chroma key this. Let's click on it. Let's go to effects. Let's scroll up here and go to the chroma key, and the background is black, so we click black, and now it's gone, right? The background is gone. That's why I made it a solid black color, because it's nice and easy to chroma key. Normally it's a green screen or blue, but black works as well. You can chroma key white as well. If you chroma key white, then the text will sort of show through, right, like this, which is quite interesting, but it's not what we want, because it's really using the video clip behind, and it's chroma keyed the white out of here. We don't want that. We want chroma key black, and we want to keep the text white here. So let's move back to the timeline. Let's click play, and then we can see that all working. There you go. Nice, right? Works really well. This is good. Let's try it one more time. Excellent. So that works well. I'm not going to save this. This was just to demonstrate the chroma key and the reason why I made it a black background. That's kind of why I'm using this demonstration here with this particular software, just to show that you can easily chroma key it out afterwards, right? You could set it to an alpha channel depending on what software you're using. If you're on a Mac, you might want an alpha channel, the background, but for me, just make it black. Just make sure whatever color you choose in the background is not the colors that you're using in the content. If this text was black, then I couldn't chroma key it using black. I would have to set it to like a green background, right? On After Effects. So let's close this. Let's shut this down. That's how you go about creating an After Effects lower third YouTube subscribe animation. So I hope you find that tutorial useful. I'm going to be doing some beginner tutorials using After Effects. I've started to learn this software myself quite recently and I'm finding it very interesting. It's a lot like other software. So if you know how to do keyframing already, so if you're used to using something like Blender, you're doing keyframing or any sort of animation based software, most stuff uses keyframes to create the animation sequences. So this was quite a basic tutorial. I'm going to be doing much more advanced stuff in After Effects, but I thought I'd start off with something quite simple. So I hope you find this tutorial useful and I look forward to seeing you on the next DCP web tutorial.